morning, my dear children. Hope you all are fine. Let us start today's session. Today, we will learn the next chapter from your textbook, First Flight, Long Walk to Freedom, written by Nelson Mandela. You might have heard this name somewhere, isn't it? You might have studied about Nelson Mandela in history, or you might have heard this name in your general knowledge books as a Nobel Prize winner and also as a first black president of South Africa. So let us study the most important chapter from his own autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. This book is an account of what he stood for and what he has attained. We are studying the lesson part by part in a systematic manner. So before starting the lesson, we know that the whole Africa was under the control of Britain. For 3 centuries, white ruled over South Africa. So let us see which incident made or caused the whites to take supremacy over the blacks. So it was Anglo-Boer War. Anglo means Britain and Boers are South African Republic and Orange Free State, or the Africans. Anglo-Boer War was fought twice. First the Africans won, but the second time it was the British or the Britons who won the war. And there starts the struggle of Africa. They started to dominate Africa and they ruled Africa for 3 centuries. So let us see what happened in the British rule. Africans were completely oppressed. No freedom was given to the Africans. Human disaster existed upon the Africans. Africans were outlaws at that time. Outlaws means people that are not inside the law. So whatever happens to an African, there was no law to stand with that man. Anyone can do anything to the black. Even they can kill, they torture. There was no judiciary or law for them. All the law was for the whites. There was continuous bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender and other discrimination existed. Africa was a land of minerals and it was their greatest wealth. But Britons, they took all that and made Africans or pushed Africans to poverty. The Britons not only tortured the Africans with all this, they also followed a system called apartheid. Apartheid is a political system where people were dominated on the basis of color or race. Institutionalized racial segregation by whites upon the blacks. People were classified into 4: black, white, Indian and colored. Whites were given special importance and others, there were no importance for them. They were deprived of all the freedom and everything. Do you think Africa tolerated all this torture and they suffered silently? No. They started to fight back. They were great leaders who fought against the whites for their freedom. Some of the important leaders were Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Chief Luthelius, Yusuf Dadus, Bram Fishers, Robert Sobukwe, etc. And let us study one of the most important freedom fighter of South Africa and about him, that is Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was born on 18th of July 1918 and died 5th of December 2013. He was a freedom fighter, member of ANC, African National Congress. Fought for the Africans, but he was arrested for 30 years and released in 1990. Later, elections were held and he was elected as the first president in 1994. And he wrote his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, and he was also a Nobel Prize winner for peace. So let us see how he was elected as the first black president. The election was held on 27th of April 1994. 252 out of 400 seats won by ANC. Nelson Mandela elected as first president from 1994 to 1999. First deputy president was Thabo Mbeki. Second deputy president was F.W. de Klerk. So, Africa was under the white rule for 3 centuries. And Nelson Mandela's ANC put an end to the white rule. And the inauguration ceremony, they made it very colorful. They want the world to know how happy they were and how happy they were for the freedom they have achieved. So the inauguration ceremony was on 10th of May 1994 in the Union Buildings Amphitheatre in Pretoria. More than 140 countries, politicians and dignitaries attended. Nelson Mandela was accompanied by his daughter Zenani. President, First and Security Deputy President, took oath for the country. And the arrangements made by South Africa were really awesome. South African jets, helicopters and troops carriers rode in perfect formation over the Union building. It was a military demonstration of their loyalty to democracy, to new government. Highest generals of South African Defence Force and police saluted Nelson Mandela. A chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the new South African flag. And new South African flag consisted of black, green, blue, red and gold color. Two national anthem was sung, Nkosi Sikelel Africa by whites and D-Stem by the blacks. So, during the inauguration ceremony or the oath taking, Nelson Mandela made a short speech. Mandela took oath in front of many other politicians and dignitaries of more than 140 countries. He conferred glory and hope to newborn liberty since they achieved political emancipation. He pledged to liberate the Africans from continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender and other discriminations. He even said in his speech that South Africa would never experience oppression by any other country. He stressed that never, never, never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. And he quoted that the sun would never set in Africa. And he prayed God to bless Africa. So this was a summary of a small speech given during his oath taking. Next, let us take a look. In his autobiography, he tells about his viewpoints. So he was grateful to the African patriots who struggled hard to liberate Africa. He was thankful to them because they suffered decades of oppression and brutality, but it did not change their intention, that is, getting freedom for South Africa. And he felt pain, or he was in pain, since these people were not able to see the result of all their sacrifices. Then he tells us about what he had learned, or what he have learned from all these years from some people, and what made him as the first black president of South Africa. So he tells that he learned from comrades. What he learned from the comrades, for the great people who were there or who fought with their life for the attainment of the freedom of South Africa. He is telling that from comrades he learned meaning of courage, since he saw them risking and giving their life. He saw men tortured and showed their strength and resilience. Resilience means the ability to deal with any kind of hardship and recover from its effects. However, these people were tortured brutally. They were ready to suffer all that because only their aim was to attain freedom for South Africa. He believed that brave are the one who conquers fear without being scared of. And he telling that he learned that Courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Then he tells us about the people. He gradually learned that people know to love. And no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. And there is no need to be taught, but hate, it is taught or it is injected to the children or the people, and that is how the hatred is there. Still, he believes that man's goodness is always there without extinguishing. And he quotes an example by telling that when he and his friends were sent to prison, he could see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards for just a second. This guard was supposed to act very brutally to Nelson Mandela and his friends, but for a second at least, he showed love or care towards his people. Thus, he believed that man's goodness can never be extinguished. Then he tells about the main point, or he asks the people or gives a message that every man is born in the world with two obligations or two duties. What are the two duties? According to Nelson Mandela, a man has twin obligations or two duties. First obligation is to his family, his parents, his wife and children. And the second obligation is to his people, his community and his country. But Nelson Mandela sadly is telling us that a colored man or African like him could never fulfill his obligation in Africa due to the oppression and dominance of whites. He is telling that he was prevented from fulfilling all the obligations as a son, a brother, a father and a husband. And he felt very sad about it. Next, the greatest message Nelson Mandela is giving to the people through his book is about freedom. Freedom meant different things to Nelson Mandela when he was at different stages of life. He is telling us about what he thought freedom was when he was a boy, a student, a young man, and when he joined ANC. So let us see what Nelson Mandela thought about freedom when he was in his boyhood. He enjoyed freedom, later he understood that it was only an illusion. He was born free in every way, free to run in the field near his mother's hut, free to swim in clear stream that ran through his village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow-moving bulls. But later, when he became a student, that idea changed, or that view of the freedom changed. He wanted freedom only for himself, the transitive freedom of being able to stay out at night, read what he pleased, go wherever he wanted to. But when he grew up as a young man, his idea of or concept of freedom changed again. As a young man in Johannesburg, he yearned for basic and honorable freedom of achieving his potential. He wanted to earn, he wanted to marry, to have a family. He wanted freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life, but slowly and gradually he realized that his freedom had already been taken from him. So that big hunger for freedom started to ignite inside Nelson Mandela. So then he decided to join an ANC, African National Congress. And let us see what happened next. He realized that not only he, but all his African brothers and sisters were not free. Everyone's freedom was curtailed by the whites. Then only Nelson Mandela's hunger for his own freedom became the greatest hunger for the freedom of his people. And he believed that freedom is indivisible. And he is telling us that chains on any one of his people were chains on all of them and chains on all of people were chains on him. So now only intention or the aim of Nelson Mandela's life was to free South Africa, to break all the chains which Africans were bonded in by the whites. And he understood that his life was for that. And he believed that a man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred, and that person is not at all free. He is locked behind, and for what he did and for attaining freedom, he did a lot of struggle. And for that, he was locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness for 30 years. He spent 30 years of his life inside jail only for fighting for freedom, South Africa. Nelson Mandela still believed that one is not truly free if he takes away someone else's freedom. He was not ready to give up his freedom of his own and his people. So let us see what inspired Nelson Mandela. Desire for freedom of his people, and he wanted to live with dignity and self-respect. So he transformed from a frightened young man, he turned into a bold one. He was a law-abiding attorney, he turned into a criminal. He was a family-loving husband, but he turned into a man without home. He was a life-loving man, but he turned into a monk. Turned into a monk means his only intention or his only thing or what he had in his mind was only the freedom, nothing else. So now you might have understood why the Africans chose Nelson Mandela to be their first president. He was a patriotic man who sacrificed his life just for the good and betterment of his people, that is Africans, and he became the first black president of non-racial democratic republic government of Africa. So, hope you have understood the lesson. Let us wind up by telling the famous quote of Nelson Mandela: "It always seems impossible until it's done." So whenever you feel that something is impossible and you cannot do it, just try that out. And if it is done, so believe in yourself. Just like Nelson Mandela, even after 30 years in jail, he did not lose hope and he became the first president of South Africa. Thank you.